I am recording, the village and saying,
Oh. Put the volumes up. There we go.
Okay, I'm gonna call the Land Bank Acquisition Committee meeting to order. We'll ask for a roll call.
Chairman Morrell, President Ron Nutt,
Here.
PJ Killer, President, Brenda Adams,
Present.
Suzette Booth,
Here.
Trace Perry,
Here.
and Chris Watts. Present. That is a quorum.
I understand Chris has some information about foreclosure acquisitions. I think we would like a motion to go into executive session.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Now you can turn it back on.
I can pause my recording.
Yeah, resume. We're entertaining a motion to do the first three and take a look at Ellisonville Road one in the future, but not move on that right now. Would be my thought, but
So this is for. Oh. Well, we'll start the process. So this is for the top three, just the four.
yeah, so the first one in question, we're gonna first off by starting to do title search or survey needed to verify it.
Right,
Pre-acquisition activity.
Pre-acquisition activity.
and that would be for all three of those first three, right?
Right.
Because we need this title.
But you know, from what I know about the two Route 8 parcels, that looks interesting to hold them for that kind of money, but you'd have to have an appraisal done and all those things, but.
Do we want a resolution? If it's for pre-acquisition activities, do you want to include the Galtonville one so we can order a title search for that and then just not do the other one?
I got appraisal and title search. Field trip would be good.
I think.
Yeah, I think a little bit more exploration. I think probably the appraisal, if we want to spend money for that, it wouldn't be a bad time to.
And they're cheap
Right.
comparatively.
Cause I think you're gonna see something show up. Why did the town get it?
I was gonna say, why don't you think we need to explore, why does the town wanna get rid of it?
Well, that's part of the title search and appraisal would.
And
But John Riley just explained that they thought that this was ripe for affordable housing. He explained that in the caucus at one point, so I think, and he said that his board was on board, that doesn't sound right. His town council was supporting that notion.
I mean, he must have been around as supervisor when they acquired this at 19, right?
And I think that's the big question here is why did they?
Why did they acquire it?
Yeah.
And did they put some deed restriction on it, or is there a clawback or?
To buy some time to answer that question, if I can make a suggestion, because this is a committee meeting, I think the resolution would just be to forward this to the full board,
Okay,
which meets in 2 weeks, and then we can do some background.
we can explore some of that between now and then. That's
All right, I'll
fine.
make it, I'll make,
To advance to the full board.
yeah.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Okay, so that resolution is just to advance to the full board. Okay.
Phew.
I figured that was gonna be a little lengthy. You didn't even get to the inclusionary zoning. I thought that was gonna be the hard part.
We're going to do, the next item is general discussion. This is Copake's inclusionary zoning and the potential land bank role. I will try to summarize this as quickly as I can, but still include all the pertinent information. I think this is more of a question for the full board also. Is anyone familiar with Copake's fairly new inclusionary zoning laws?
Yes,
So we talked
I
about
read it. I got a lot of questions, but.
one of our housing task force members from Copake, Meredith Kane, was the primary architect behind this inclusionary zoning law. There's a lot to it. Meredith sent an email towards the end of last year asking if the land bank could fill certain roles that the town would require for this. Some of them were immediate no's just based on staffing capacity. It was things like, can land bank staff verify income? There's no one here that can do that. There are a couple other questions that were similar. Generally, kind of the overview of the inclusionary zoning law is if you're a developer and you're doing every major subdivision that happens in Copake going forward under this zoning law, you've got to you either have to build some affordable units or you set aside 20% of your subdivision. So if you're doing 5 acres, you set aside an acre. And that would be for affordable housing. It does not need to be the same developer, so that can be transferred to a nonprofit, it can be transferred to the town can identify a nonprofit partner. What the developer gets is a density bonus on the remaining parcels that they are developing. So there's no question of, does the land bank want to be, potentially we could be that nonprofit entity that holds on to the land after it's, subdivided. I think it might be a little bit cleaner for it to get donated to the town and then for it to go from the town to the land bank, just from the way land banks acquire properties. I think where you start to get into some stickier territories and, it's a law, but it's not, no law is perfect and it hasn't had any kind of precedent, there've been no cases with it yet.
I'm gonna go to court someday.
It hasn't been tested,
It,
basically.
it may, so the kind of the big driving, the spine that this is all hung on is what they call affordable workforce housing, which they have defined. So affordable workforce housing is anyone that's making, I believe it's below 80% of AMI. Well, they have a qualifying income, so it's in there somewhere, so they dictate what that is. But then there's also a list of, you don't have to income qualify for this type of housing if you're in one of these occupation categories. Which are things like volunteer fire department, town of Copic municipal employee.
You can be a county attorney,
school
though. You
employees.
could be a county attorney, make all kinds of money and still live there. and-
Right, so that was one of the things I pointed out. So I wanted to bring this, I wanted to bring it to the board because ultimately it's up to you, but I had a little bit of reticence about this because it's sort of untested law. Is the board comfortable potentially getting involved in this? Do you want more information? I would like to invite Meredith to a future land bank board meeting to kind of explain this a little bit more robustly. But essentially, it's another way for the land bank to acquire parcels, and then, those parcels can be developed specifically for affordable housing.
Is there any, I know this is new for Copac, but
This is new almost everywhere.
that's what I was gonna ask. Is there any example of this? And I'm just trying to understand what the frequency might be, in terms of development and land acquisition.
I mean, they haven't had a single subdivision application since this was written.
I assume it'll discourage most everybody.
I would discourage rather than encourage.
Yeah, so
actually.
it's been about 18 or 16 months since this was written. It is based on, I'm not gonna remember the name of the town. It's one of those, the northeast corner of Dutchess. There's the three towns that,
Millerton, Amenia.
Amenia, it's based on Amenia's inclusionary zoning. So there's precedent out there as far as it existing somewhere in a zoning code. I don't know if any projects have come in front of Amenia on that would fall under these metrics or these.
And they're part of the Rogen Housing Coalition,
They are.
right? So the Rogen Housing Coalition is looking for appropriately scaled projects. I mean, for, in terms of numbers of units, or are we looking at big projects? I'm just wondering what the 20% set aside might be. Would it be for 1 unit or 2 units or 4 units or 10 units?
I think it's just whatever the underlying zoning allows. So there's no density bonus for the affordable housing for that 20% set aside. So I believe it would just be for whatever the underlying zoning allows you to develop.
So if you were developing 20 units, you'd set aside 2 units?
If you were
4
the
units,
developer, well, you would set aside 4.
20%, right?
Or you set aside the.
But then those, so when somebody builds on those, then they have to comply with Copac's
That's right.
law about who's gonna live there. And that becomes my question is, as if we held the land and then found a developer, are we gonna have a hard time finding a developer to build houses based on the requirements of that law? That's, if they gave us the land, and then you think, okay, you wanna build houses for affordable housing. And it's defined, but there's some pretty steep regulations in the other part of that law, and I don't know if that follows. It.
Well, and also, I mean, I don't know if you're saying, maybe you're saying this, I'm just gonna ask it a different way. If you just put in market rate units and there's a set aside for affordable units, it may be that the market rate units don't wanna have affordable units back.
And that's what that says, that when they do market rate, they can do market rate. But then they're gonna give us the land and then we have to find a developer that would build houses. With the rules, the income rules that this has,
Right.
and how Copac's ever gonna enforce the income rules, I know their assessor told them she didn't have any interest in
But
doing that.
I'm just thinking of the homeowners associations, these may not be homeowner associations.
Depends on the scale of it, probably,
Right,
right?
but the ones that the 4 that we have in Canaan, those. By the time those units are sold, nobody remembers what any of the
Yeah,
original
right.
conditions were. And then then all of a sudden, something comes up
But
about.
this talks about deed restrictions.
I know,
Yeah, that was a question, that's one of my open questions, so the mechanism by which you enforce the affordability is unclear to me. There is some reference to the planning board approving deed restrictions, which is not something I believe planning boards have the authority to do. It's also unclear to me, to Supervisor Now's point, it's.
You're not the attorney for Copic, are you?
No.
Doc.
I'm not sure who's expected to put together the development deal. So is it
Yeah.
the town that puts together the development deal? Would it be whoever the nonprofit is that's holding on to the parcel in the interim? So there's a lot of open questions here. This is not a yes or no.
So again, if they wanted to donate a piece of land without restrictions on it,
Right.
I'm happy to talk about it, but, when it comes to some of this, I got a lot of concerns.
I'm afraid I share those concerns.
Yeah,
My eyes were crossed when I started.
You wanna read the first half of this?
this is one of those things.
I only gave you that section, cause that's,
You kind of want someone to sue the town to find out how this holds up, right?
Right.
Like, you sort of want there to be established case law before you really get
Sounds like
involved.
somebody eventually will.
But I
Yeah.
just, I don't understand why the town would have the standing to have to enforce something like this. I think it goes all the way back to standing. How you would restrict properties like this.
Yeah, what's the enforceability?
Right.
Yeah.
You can restrict use, but you can't. I don't think you can restrict how people use property, but you can't, you can say you can only have so many. Houses or so many stores or so many, or you can do it by volume or type of use or whatever, but based on income. Or,
The income base makes sense. It's these are the protected occupations. That's the part that was the very first thing when this first
Again, I
came across.
forgot. Do you have
I didn't copy the whole thing, Karen, so I just have to.
Firefighter, town employee, rescue squad employee, Tacoma Kill Central School District employee with a minimum of 6 months of employment, full-time state of New York or Columbia County employee and resides in the town of Copic. Household with at least one member was a veteran or active duty member of the United States Armed Forces. Or
I thought the
reserve.
firefighters exemption was confusing.
I know.
This is.
Well, I'm sorry. what was that?
farm work?
Farm workers.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
So that's really to circumvent the fair housing rules, I think.
Well, the first line of this is any household with income not exceeding the qualifying income, which is fine. And then the rest of it starts to get into some trickier territory.
Cause you're all over
Sources
the
of
map.
income is not something that you're allowed to decide who can live in your property or not.
It's up to you, but I would say skip the presentation.
Let's continue to ask some questions. Yeah,
Just get the warrant up.
Well, you can say it's early days yet.
Yeah.
Early days.
I hate to rush along, but we have
Well,
a
this
meeting at 4 o'clock.
Is anybody on there, public comment?
Nobody's on public.
All right. I make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Yeah, you already done something.
Is the next meeting in here or upstairs?